Welcome to the Field Dynamics podcast. We're here to facilitate inspiring dialogues about the nature of consciousness across disciplines, communities, and practitioners, all with a holistic perspective.
From energy healing to somatic therapies, from neuroscience to meditation, we believe the most interesting things happen at the boundaries of disciplines.
I'm Christabel.
And I'm Keith.
Thanks for joining us today and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Field Dynamics podcast. Today we have with us guest Midge Murphy. Midge Murphy practiced entertainment law in California for over a decade, working with prestigious clients such as 20th Century Fox and Disney. Yet after attaining her professional goals, she found herself on a quest to explore her spirituality and the emerging field of energy medicine with luminaries such as Norm Shealy and Carolyn Meese. Eventually, in 2001, she became the first attorney to earn a PhD in energy medicine, becoming an energy medicine practitioner. Given her prior experience, that same year she was asked to teach a class on ethics and legal issues, and in doing so realized that without appropriate education and training, both licensed and non-licensed practitioners that incorporate energy healing methods into their practice face possible legal risks. As a result, Midge opened her consulting practice in ethics, legal issues, and risk management strategies in the practice of and training in energy healing methods. For over 15 years, she has been serving many of the best-known practitioners and training organizations in the field. Midge is recognized as a leading expert and a dynamic presenter and teacher, publishing her book, Practice Energy Healing in Integrity, expanded and updated in 2020. Welcome, Midge. Pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for that introduction. I really appreciate it. And yes, thanks for the opportunity to share some time with you and answer some questions.
We're really excited today, Midge, as we'll be exploring a domain that is very much in our field of expertise, and that is the world of energy healing. So you may know Field Dynamics not only offers private sessions with clients, but also primarily provides trainings in this field, including a certified practitioner route. So today we'll be talking with you about what energy healing practitioners should know about safeguarding their practice, averting potential challenges, and creating a legal, sound, and ethical practice. But before we get started on the legalities regarding energy work, we'd love to hear more from you about your personal journey and how you came to focus your legal practice in the domain of energy healing.
Well, that's an interesting question. I kind of walk between both worlds, and that is the world of business, legal, regulatory issues, and also the world of energy healing. I think a significant moment that happened for me personally was I've been a hospice volunteer, and this was over 20 years ago. And being a hospice volunteer, I was given the opportunity to learn therapeutic touch, and that was my first introduction to any kind of energy healing modality. And when I was introduced to it, there was such a known resonance within my system, how intuitively I knew where this energy was and where it was going. It kind of surprised me because it's like, I'm a lawyer. What am I doing with all this energy? And I can feel it in people. I can see it moving. And so that was my first introduction to learning an energy healing technique myself, and found that that was really a part of me that I really had not explored before. I was very focused on my career as an attorney. And from there, just a series of events where I got to meet Carolyn Meese and Norm Shealy, and they were teaching courses together, and Norm was heading up the Greenwich program at that time, giving opportunities to have the opportunity to earn a PhD in energy medicine. So I was just kind of going with my inner guidance. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. Didn't have any great plans. I just said, this is what I need to do. I was following that intuition and that sort of more of a heart-centered path than making it feel logical, because it wasn't. It wasn't a logical path at all. So then I learned, had the opportunity to be initiated as a Reiki master. And then I started working a lot, and that's again about the time I learned therapeutic touch. I started working with a lot of different shamanic practitioners. So I've had a series of trainings and mentorships with a number of indigenous healers over the last 25 years. So I use a lot of shamanic work as well when I do any kind of energy healing work with clients. And I work a lot with animals as well. So when I got involved with matrix energetics, and I was certified in matrix energetics, and what I discovered is that people want to go out and help people. They feel inclined to offer their services and do energy healing. They're very naive, in my opinion, about what it is and what it takes to actually run a business, and that you're offering a healthcare service. So I think my journey was, how can I best be of service when I have these two worlds that I hold, that I can be a bridge and offer this training and this information to the field itself, so it can continue to move forward and become more professional. And that way people can access these healers more readily, rather than being afraid that they're going to get in trouble with the law. So that's kind of the process.
We're going to be using this term energy healing quite a bit in this discussion. So maybe it's important that we define what methods are included by the term and how this relates to what's known as CAM, or complementary and alternative medicine.
Well, that's a great question. I think, we have to kind of figure out where energy healing methods fits within the current regulatory and legal system that governs healthcare professionals, because we are healthcare professionals. And I really like Michael Cohen's definition. He's, to me, the leading academic in this field. He wrote a book called Future Medicine. And his definition of complementary and alternative medicine is, it's a consensus term meaning anything outside of bio-Western medicine. So that's a huge field. So he kind of describes energy healing methods as a subsection of the overall arching field of complementary and alternative medicine. And I think, for the exact definition of energy healing or energy medicine, there are some methods that are more biofield related. Therapeutic touch, I would call, is more biofield related. EFT tapping is meridian based. There's radiant circuits and there's the chakras. So in terms of definitions, I think, we're working with the human energy system, which then can affect the physical template of someone if they're dealing with a health issue.
Thanks, Midge. I really appreciate your attitude towards professionalism there. We're very aware, Keith and I, that as both facilitators and training providers, this type of knowledge and education is really crucial in order for energy healing practitioners to gain a broader acceptance as they participate within the larger healthcare and wellness industries. So I'd love to just extend on that and ask how energy healing practitioners fit into the current legal and regulatory framework that governs healthcare professionals. And I appreciate you may well be talking specifically to the USA here.
Yeah, pretty much the USA and Canada as well. Well, I think what's important to understand is that, as I mentioned, there's this overarching framework. We fit within the field of CAM now, or complementary alternative medicine. I'll call it CAM. In CAM, there are practitioners that are licensed in every single state, and chiropractors would be an example of complementary alternative medicine practitioners that are licensed in all 50 states. Now, there's another group, they're licensed in some states and not in others, and that would be naturopathic physicians, doctors, and acupuncturists, and people that practice Chinese medicine. Then there's another huge umbrella, which we all fit in, and that we're completely unregulated. And there's only one exception to that. There are a number of states, a few states, that require anyone who does energy healing methods that uses any kind of touch to be licensed as a massage therapist. So what's happening is there's a lot of rumblings going on right now. There are some states that are actively trying to pass legislation that would require energy healing practitioners to be licensed in order to practice. So I think there's a lot of things that are being stirred up, and there's a lot of misinformation, unfortunately, that's being put out there. And so that's why I'm here today, to hopefully give some information about what's happening and the importance of the fact that the states are moving towards either some kind of regulation, and we don't know what it's going to look like here in the next few years.
There seems to be a kind of an odd circumstance regarding energy work between legality and the word legitimacy. So we have something like liability or risk in relation to practicing energy healing, and yet at the same time, scientifically, we might find that methodology is considered pseudoscientific and not valid, like doesn't do anything. So how is it that we're liable for something that science says doesn't even exist or work?
The biggest risk that non-licensed practitioners face is being charged with practicing a licensed profession without a license. So for us energy healing practitioners, the two most that we are in jeopardy of being charged with is practicing medicine or psychotherapy without a license. So that's really what I focus on in terms of working in this field and helping people so they don't get into a lawsuit about an energy healing practitioner hurting them. What we want to be aware of is that how do we mitigate those risks? And unfortunately, the playing field is not level. So all 50 states have medical practice acts, and the definition of the practice of medicine is extremely broad. It just means, the bottom line is, any kind of healing is considered the practice of medicine. So, and there's case law on this. There's all kinds of cases. If you call yourself a healer, don't ever call yourself a healer. That would be perceived as practicing medicine without a license. Where someone was just doing hands-on healing work, and this was the early 1920s, and he was charged with practicing medicine without a license. So the risks are huge. It's not that necessarily you're going to get an unhappy client and you're going to get sued, but the fact is that you're going to get a cease and desist letter from a licensing board saying what you're doing is violating their Medical Practice Act. Now, the other issue with us as energy healing practitioners who work across state lines is that I'm in Oregon, but if I were perceived as practicing medicine without a license, I could get a cease and desist letter from New York, from California, from Arizona. The bottom line is, where you reside, you are subject to the laws and regulations in the state in which you practice. You are also subject to the laws and regulations of the person that you're working with. So that's another thing that we need to consider. And this is a much bigger risk from a legal standpoint than necessarily an unhappy client that wants to sue you. So I think that's really important for your readers, your audience to know about. And the other issue is how people market themselves on websites as energy healing practitioners. Huge risk of being in violation of Federal Trade Commission rules and regulations around how you offer your services to the public, how you describe your services. And this is where a lot of energy healing practitioners now have a high risk of getting one of those cease and desist letters. If you use the word pain on your website, if you say you treat patients, if you use the word treatment, those are all words that would indicate that you are practicing medicine without a license. So the risk is really more in terms of your ability to practice because of the current laws and regulations that govern how healthcare services are provided to the public.
Thank you, Midge. And this is a really important point you raised here, this idea of the term healer. And I just want to highlight for listeners the clarification there in using the term in place, say, energy healing practitioner in place of energy healer in relationship to that risk.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Christabel. And there's another reason why I don't like the word healer, not only necessarily from a legal standpoint, but from an ethical standpoint, because the only true healer is your client. When you take on that mantle, you can take on all kinds of projections, and then you're not a clear channel for what you want to do for your client. So I think it's important, and that's my personal bias, is that I don't like the word healer because I think it's unethical. Because in my mind, in how I operate my energy healing practice, I'm not the healer. The only person who's the healer is the client I'm working on, or the animal that I'm working with.
Really appreciate you clarifying that as well, Midge. It relates to something closely as one of the key teaching points in field dynamics, where we use the phrase, the healer doesn't heal, for those exact reasons. So we have a lengthy and comprehensive process for certification here at Field Dynamics. It's something we think is really important for this kind of work. Many subtle energy modalities currently offer certification, but the range of requirements can be quite staggering. So people can qualify in things or be masters at things literally within a single weekend. Alternately, some programs are multiple years. We'd love to talk to you about what the value is of certification for an energy healing practitioner, and what you would consider to be the essential components for such a certification program for it to be considered legitimate and professional.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think with respect to how we are perceived by the healthcare field and the public in general, is that it's the wild, wild west. As you say, anyone can put their hands up and throw out a shingle. I'm an energy healing practitioner, or I've been trained in this and that. So it does, the gamut, the sort of the spectrum of certification programs out there is huge, and most of them are not legitimate. And it it is considered highly unethical for someone to go take a weekend workshop or read a manual over the internet and then say, okay, I'm certified in this particular modality. And I think, and that's unprofessional. And that's what's holding the field back, because there are a lot of really unscrupulous people that are wanting to certify and they're just wanting to make money. And they really don't understand what's going on out there in terms of how we are perceived by the public. It's actually a detriment. So, but a legitimate certification program, I think, contains several really specific elements. And one is you got to get the training in the modality itself. And that can vary in terms of how much time that takes. But you need to become proficient in the actual modality. And I think it's important when you're going through a certification program that you're really focusing on that modality. Because a lot of us come to maybe a program we want to add another tool to our tool belt. It's not about combining methods. It's about really learning this particular method that you're being trained in. And then you have to practice. So you have practice clients. And does that student demonstrate competency and professionalism in actually using and applying that method in a therapeutic setting? So how many practice sessions? It really varies, but at least 60, I would say. And then sometimes certain modalities, you want to have maybe one practice client where you're working on, maybe you have 3 or 4 sessions with them to kind of work through a particular sort of issue or whatever. Another important thing is you have to actually observe the student doing this modality with a practice client. And so I work with a lot of different training organizations. Some of them will require maybe 3 or 5 video sessions that are actually videotaped so that the program director, the people that are evaluating the student competency, can actually see them work with a practice client so they understand and get a feel for making sure they really know how to work with someone in a therapeutic setting. That is absolutely critical. And sometimes, instead of like a video that they tape, sometimes they'll do a Zoom call with the client for a practice session, and then the program director will join that Zoom call and actually live watch that particular practice session being done. That is absolutely critical, because it's one thing to learn a modality. It's a whole nother ballgame to be able to use that in a therapeutic setting with someone else. So that's important. I think it's also important for the person who's going through a certification program to actually be the client of that modality as well. So that's maybe having someone like a trainer or something, doing several sessions with that particular client or that student while they're going through the certification process. So they know what it's like to be a client. They actually know what it is to receive and be involved in being the recipient of that energy healing modality. That's what all my EFT practitioners and trainers do, that train and certify EFT practitioners. The other important piece is what I have to offer, and that is my book, which is Practice Energy Healing in Integrity, and the exam based on my book. That is part of the core curriculum. Without that, without them getting training in ethics and legal issues, what is their scope of practice? How do they market themselves? And so that's why I'm kind of out talking and wanting to let people know that this resource is here. Once you've got all of that in place and you've evaluated them, then you feel that they're qualified to be certified. So that's a really key component as well. There's a lot involved when you have a certification program.
No, thank you so much, Midge. It's an amazing body of knowledge you're sharing with us. We're very, very interested in what we're doing and in general for the whole field of alternative and complementary medicine, that there be a real upgrade and respect to the depth of this work. And because of the looseness of the regulatory frameworks out there right now, it's really up to the practitioners, the organizations, the training bodies that exist to make sure that they are self-regulating. Out of curiosity, you mentioned maybe even external third-party examining or certifying bodies that exist out there. Have you found any, or do you endorse any that do exist, that are like national bodies or organizations like the NAPH, for example, leading the charge to become a solid regulatory body?
No, I don't. There was an organization that was started trying to bring some national credentials to the energy practitioner field. Unfortunately, in my opinion, it's kind of gotten off track as to what its original purpose was. And so I can't endorse it. And so as far as I know, there is nothing that exists yet. And I think there are some of us that are talking about it again, thinking about it would be nice, it would be helpful, I think, for the field if there was some kind of a national center that we could work with that would provide, some kind of national credentials and standardization, including the ethics and legal portion, but it doesn't exist yet. And so that's why I think some states they're just sort of going on and wanting to start to license. And might be interesting to your listeners is that one of the impetuses for some states moving forward and wanting to license energy healing practitioners actually revolves around the sex trade. And that's because what's been happening in some states is that some of these sex trafficking places are fronts for Reiki parlors and Reiki practices. So all of a sudden this has come into play. And when I first heard about it, I go, really? But yeah, that's it's a way to, because the massage field is now pretty well regulated. So this is a way that people have been using sex trafficking around a completely unregulated service, which is Reiki and some other kinds of things like that. So that's kind of what's also rumbling around a little bit in some of the states as a way to stop the sex trafficking, is to make Reiki practitioners and other energy healing practitioners be subject to licensure.
Yeah, it's fascinating, Midge, to consider that development from where massage might have been, used previously as a kind of cover term for such industries. Really something to consider there. Really appreciate you also talking extensively about the training requirements from the perspective of a training body, which we are, but also hope that our listeners can take away the fact that everything you shared there is very useful in terms of them considering, flipping the requirements, as it were, and considering what to look for in a training body, which really makes all those points you made super relevant for people potentially looking to train in these arts. And we look for some time, Keith and I extensively, for an external third-party examining body. We wanted to be held accountable, by a larger organization, and we were just very dissatisfied with what we saw out there. Such an important conversation to be having around how we take this seriously, how we hold ourselves professionally and ethically in this area. Say you're an energy healing practitioner out there in the world and you're already seeing clients or you're looking to connect with clients. What are the key legal principles here that a person should know about?
Well, there's quite a few, and they're all in my book, but one of the most important things is this concept of informed consent and having a client-centered practice. I don't even like to call it informed consent because that has the connotation that you're offering some kind of licensed healthcare services. And I'm always very aware and manage my words, but basically it's a client agreement and disclosure statement. And that is to build rapport. And that should be a legal document that clearly states what it is that you're offering, what you're not offering. There are certain disclosures and disclaimers that need to be made. So I think this concept of informed consent is critical. And most energy healing practitioners are pretty clueless about this process. They don't even have anything written, and that's where you can get into trouble. And also what's nice about a client agreement and disclosure statement is that if you are questioned by a licensing board, and if I've written it, then it's going to clearly state that this is what you offer as an energy healing practitioner, and it discloses that you do not offer any kind of medical services or psychological services, and that blah, blah, blah. So it makes it clear if a licensing board was to question you, you could show your client agreement and say, look, it's very clear that I do not offer any kind of licensed healthcare services as an energy healing practitioner. So that's one legal concept or principle to be aware of as a practitioner. The other one, there's several. I maybe not go through all of them, but I think it's really important to discuss this concept of privacy and confidentiality. Absolutely critical. And it's not something to be taken lightly. So that you have an ethical obligation, obviously, to keep everything that's shared with you by a client private and confidential. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't that do energy healing work. They post something on Facebook. They talk about a client to another friend. there's a lot of breaches of confidentiality and privacy that I see in the field. And this is also a legal principle. You can be sued for breach of confidentiality or invasion of privacy for mishandling the information or not handling the information properly with respect to what your client shares with you in a session. And so this is another really important legal consideration. Some of the others are obviously negligent. You can be sued for negligence, which is the breach of duty of due care. And, even if a court, going back, there have been a lot of people I've talked to who have had bad experiences with energy healing practitioners, boundary violations, psychological violations. And this is another myth, I think, that's out there, that energy healing is completely safe and is not harmful. And that is just not true. People can very much be deeply harmed by energy work, and if it's not done properly. So I think that's an important consideration as well. And there's a thing called the breach of fiduciary duty. We have a fiduciary duty to our clients. That's the legal concept of trust. And that's even a higher level of confidentiality and privacy. This concept of we have a fiduciary relationship. It's a trust. If we breach the trust of our clients, we can be sued. And so that's some of the legal principles that we need to be aware of. I'm trying to think if there's some, I'm sure there's some others. Breach of confidentiality, informed consent, negligence, and breach of, privacy and confidentiality. Yeah. I'll leave it at that for now. There's some others, but we'll just leave it for that for now.
Many people we work with have a background in other therapeutic approaches, be it other energy healing methods, nursing, body work, yoga, talk therapy, etc. Some of these being, of course, legally regulated healthcare professions, others not. How do you advise people about integrating energy work with other approaches, and what are the legal considerations?
So if you're an unlicensed practitioner, as I mentioned, you always are under the threat of being charged with practicing medicine or psychotherapy without a license. So you have to be very careful that you're not perceived as doing so. Now, if you're a licensed practitioner, you have other risks. And the risks there are if you incorporate an energy healing practice into your licensed practice, you have to be very mindful and very careful, because what could happen is your licensing board could say X, Y, and Z is not considered within the scope of practice as legally defined by your statute as, let's say, a licensed professional counselor. And so if you're bringing in a modality that is not part of the legally defined scope of practice that you are licensed to do, then you can be subject to professional discipline. You can lose your license. So that's why it's really important to be very careful about how you go about that. So a licensed practitioner has a completely different set of risks, and that is being subject to professional discipline and or losing their license if they integrate an energy healing practice into their practice, and it's not part of the recognized legally defined scope of practice. The other way the courts will say, or the license board say, you're practicing below the standards of care, because we don't recognize this as part of the standards of care in our profession. So that's the big issue that licensed folks face. And then, of course, unlicensed folks face the other issue, and that is being charged with practicing a licensed profession without a license, and it's a crime. You're not going to get thrown in jail, but these are criminal violations. And I think that's important for people to know. So, and sometimes you'll get a fine. Some people have gotten fined. They're not throwing people in jail. Some people are saying you're going to get thrown in jail if you're an energy healing practitioner. That's not true. But I think it's really important to be aware of where your boundaries are and what it is your scope of practice legally is. And once you know that, then you're more free to go out and offer your services to the public. So that's what I'm all about. It's like, let's educate, let's get curious, let's find out what it is we need to know. How can we put strategies into place to reduce our risk, rather than say, oh, that's kind of scary, I don't want to think about the legal stuff. That's been the history of our field. And it's kind of now, it's like, okay, we need to now move out of that phase and to finally really address these issues, because this is how we become better practitioners and in turn can better serve our clients.
I think that's a really important point, Midge. I appreciate you making that so clearly. This moving beyond the fear, and just taking responsibility and advocating for, clear understanding and education around these issues. And it's a responsibility of people doing this work. And it really should be considered a great honor and responsibility to do this type of work. And of course, part and parcel of that is understanding these requirements. I'd love for you to share a little bit with us about safe harbor laws, if that's okay, and healthcare freedom legislation, and how they might impact an energy healing practitioner's ability to practice.
That's a great question. And safe harbor laws came out of the Healthcare Freedom Coalition. So let me back up just a little bit. So there is an ethical principle that is still highly recognized in the United States, and that's the principle of autonomy, the patient's or the client's right to choose. So safe harbor laws were really initiated as a result of consumer need, and it's a grassroots effort. So because all energy healing practitioners face the risk of being charged with practicing medicine without a license, it's this big dark cloud. State legislatures, let's talk about California for just a second. California has a healthcare freedom law. Not all states do. But they said, hey, look, we want our citizens to be able to access these, what they call them, alternative healing arts practitioners. But they're afraid to, because there's this onus that they're going to be charged with practicing medicine without a license. So they passed a law that says basically, okay, if you want to offer your services to the public, you will need to be in compliance with this law, which states that you can offer your services to the public as long as you don't do certain things. So obviously, you're not going to do surgery. You're not going to tell someone to stop taking their medication. You're not going to diagnose anybody. You're not, blah, blah, blah. And as long as you have a client agreement and disclosure statement that discloses the following information, such as a disclosure that you're not licensed by the state of California as a healing arts practitioner, you have to put that in your advertising as well. The theoretical basis of the modalities that you offer, your training and education, there's certain other elements that have to go in. Then the client signs this agreement and you have to keep it for 3 years. So it's not a license to practice anything. What it is, it gives you what they call a safe harbor, a place where as long as you're in compliance with the law, you can offer your services to the public without that threat. And in California, it only covers the practice of medicine. So if you're doing a lot of EFT tapping, which kind of can go from into helping people release negative or limiting beliefs about themselves so they can feel more positive and maybe go ask for that raise and all that kind of stuff. Great tool, great method for helping people in that realm. But as soon as you start to talk about, well, I'm going to help people with anxiety and PTSD and all that, you're not a licensed psychotherapist, you will be charged with practicing psychotherapy without a license in a heartbeat. So that's what's important to know. So these safe harbor laws, there's only 11. The ones that have the most sort of meat to them that really feel really protect people, the ones I'm thinking of is New Mexico, and Minnesota was the very first one. Maine has one, Nevada has one, Colorado has one. And so if you're in those states and you're a practitioner and you're not licensed, you really need to know and understand and be in compliance with that law. Since I've been working with clients for the last 15 years, and I talk to someone who wants to work with me and they're in Colorado, I said, well, have you heard of Colorado's healthcare freedom law? And they go, no. It's, and that just breaks my heart, to be honest with you. It's like, okay, you have these tools that are there to really support your work. And so it's always about educating and empowering so that people can take those next steps and take those strategic tools that can be put into place to make sure that they are as free as possible to offer their services to the public. And so that's what safe harbor laws are all about. It's a way of allowing people who are not licensed to practice so long as they follow the law.
Could you tell us a little bit about the idea of a sacred contract? You use this term in your book, and how this sacred contract informs the ethics in the client-practitioner relationship.
Oh, thank you for that question. So my background, when I was writing the book, I was working with Carolyn Mason, Norm Shealy, when Carolyn was writing her book, Sacred Contracts, and working with the archetypes. And when I was writing the book in 2015, I really for me personally, view the relationship I have with my clients as sacred. And that's sort of like dropping down into more of a realm of interconnectedness and right relationship from a Buddhist standpoint, I would say. And so, what I like about the concept of a sacred contract, and if you're aware of how archetypal patterns can be present in a therapeutic relationship, it can vastly improve your ability to work with clients. So, for instance, and I talk a lot, there's a whole chapter in the book about this. So, when I work with someone, I really am looking at archetypal patterns. Now, archetypal patterns are just energetic patterns that may inform the personality. When they're part of who you are, they're personal to you, but archetypes are in the collective unconsciousness, right? They're just there. So I think it can really help the therapeutic relationship, especially around the power differential. And this is another legal concept of exploiting the power differential between the client and the practitioner. And us as practitioners, we are in charge of the power differential. What that means is that inherently, the power in the relationship is more geared towards the practitioner than the client. The client's coming to you, especially when you're doing energy work. They may not know a lot about it. It's maybe a little sort of out there. They're curious, they're willing to learn, they're open. But there's a way that if you are not absolutely pristine with how you work with the power differential, you can disempower that client in a heartbeat. Because sometimes something will happen, like they may come to you, they have an issue, you do some energy work, and all of a sudden, something shifts very dramatically for them. And all of a sudden, oh my gosh, you healed me. And it's, no, I did not heal you. Thank you for the opportunity to be present with you, to be a witness to your process. You're the really only true healer. And so what happens is, once that client projects onto you, oh, you're the all-knowing healer, then what happens, there's this Dartmouth triangle that can start to build up from an archetypal standpoint. As soon as they feel that you've disappointed them, then they're angry and they're upset. So I think what's important from learning about archetypes is that it can make you a better practitioner in terms of, like, especially if you're working with the power differential and your client, you noticing there's this parent-child dynamic going on where they're viewing you as the parent and they have more of a childlike sort of energy with you, that can really undermine the power differential. And you have to be very careful and mindful about that in terms of how you work with that person. Someone may come in and they have a Don Juan archetype. And so they're wanting to maybe sexualize, or, they have that vibe that you want to make clear boundaries so that that doesn't get kind of skewed up, or something happens where they're thinking that maybe they're doing some countertransference on you, and all of a sudden that archetype is animated, and then you're kind of needing to unravel some things. So there's so many different scenarios that can happen with how archetypes will show up. But I found it, for me, it's extremely helpful because it gives me a chance to step back and really start to look around me in terms of that dynamic with that person. And that can inform me as to how best to manage some things within the therapeutic relationship. So I hope that helps and answers your question.
It's a beautiful energy to bring to the discussion, Midge. Thank you. As we're lost here in the realm of legalities, I'd love to take it back a little bit to potential practitioners who are out there in the world trying to do their best and get this right. Obviously, one of the first things they might do is set up a website. So I'd like to ask you about website disclaimers, client testimonials, because I know there's some pitfalls there.
So a website disclaimer is the legal document that governs the relationship between you and visitors to your website. So it is absolutely critical because the Federal Trade Commission, which is the regulatory agency that governs how you advertise your services to the public, has a task force that regularly looks at websites making any kind of claim about a new modality or a product that can do this and that, especially around where people are vulnerable, weight loss things, people that are dealing with a lot of stress, different kinds of issues, chronic health conditions. So it's important that the website disclaimer then is a way of really clearly, from a legal standpoint, saying exactly what it is you're doing, what you're not offering. So if the FTC or a licensing board were to be looking at you, it can really help mitigate or lower your potential risk of putting a huge red flag over your head. So the other part of that is a website audit. So it's one thing to have a disclaimer, which is based on the contents of your website, and it's customized and drafted specifically for what it is you have on your website. So it's not like you just throw up a disclaimer or you take one from another website or you think there's just a form you can create. No, that's what's important to know is that your website needs to be audited as well, which means someone goes through, and this is, I do a lot of these myself as a professional liability consultant, that makes sure that what you're saying on your website does not create a legal problem for yourself. And I'll get into testimonials and claims in a second. So some people will say, you will learn this. So that sentence creates a legal guarantee. So listen, you will learn this if you take this course. Okay, so that creates a legal guarantee. If you have one person that takes that course and they say, I didn't learn anything, I thought it was really bogus, they can sue you because you misrepresented to them what it is you are selling. So you can say, you will have the opportunity to learn blah, 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 blah. And that takes care of that issue. So that's one issue. There's lots of times people inadvertently create legal guarantees on their websites without even being aware of it. And the other issue is how you describe your services and what kind of title that you use on your website. That's critical in terms of creating a real issue for yourself. So again, don't call yourself a healer. I have people that say that I'm an energy healing therapist. Never use the word therapist if you're not licensed, because the perception is you're offering some kind of licensed healthcare service. So there's certain words that you want to avoid. Now, with respect to testimonials, and this is really important, testimonials are considered a form of advertising. And of course, a lot of us have testimonials on our websites. It's a way of hopefully getting more clients to come and work with us. But the issue is the Federal Trade Commission requires that not only that testimonials be true, but any kind of a claim in a testimonial must be supported by competent and reliable scientific proof. So I just had one where someone says they did this XYZ session and their hip pain went away forever. So first of all, you can't make a claim that one session is going to forever deal with any kind of issue. So this testimonial puts that practitioner at risk for being charged with practicing medicine without a license, because if you're working with someone's hip pain, you're practicing medicine. And there's no scientific proof that this particular modality can safely remove pain in a hip. So the other people say, well, gosh, but this is what happened. And this is my client's words. It's First Amendment. No, there is no First Amendment right when it comes to client testimonials. So that's just really important. And they are one of the reasons that people get into trouble is that they put up client testimonials that are in breach of Federal Trade Commission rules and regulations, and they do not mess around. The FTC. So, and they will fine you. I mean, I'll give you an example, and this is all public record. In the mid 90s, one of the very big pioneers in TFT, thought field therapy, Roger Callahan, had a website, and I'm not sure exactly what he was trying to sell. It was either dealing with addictions or it was some kind of maybe a weight loss program using TFT. Well, the FTC came after him. He had to sign a consent decree. He was fined $50,000 and he had to shut down his website. And so there's ways that you can put yourself out there that hopefully you don't get that letter from the Federal Trade Commission. And they're looking and they have a task force. So it's really important to not make any claims on your website as well, because that kind of comes into that same arena as client testimonials. And it's really a good idea to have a little release form. If you have a client that you want to put a client testimony on your website, that they sign that so you have the legal right to use it. But again, you have to be very, very careful around the use of client testimonials, and every client testimony on your website needs a disclosure in front of it according to FTC rules and regulations that say something like, you can't predict or guarantee any outcome from an individual using your services. But here's what here's one client has to say. It's something positive. So that's also important to actually add to the what you add to your website when you have client disclaimers and client disclosure statements and testimonials on your website.
Looking at all of this through a microscope and through a legal lens is very valuable, again, to keep things above board and professional in this emerging field. And speaking about this emerging field, things are changing very fast, and the public discourse about health and wellness is in constant evolution, particularly about ways to improve all-around health through holistic approaches and alternative medicine. I mean, it's 2023. It was very different in 2000. It was very different in 1980. It was very different in 1950. Things are going to continue to change. How do you see energy healing's role in this sea change? And what do you see as the future of energy healing from a legal standpoint?
Well, I think we are moving towards a more holistic approach. It's interesting how some of the government now is calling it integrative healthcare, not even integrative medicine. But they haven't recognized energy healing as part of that paradigm, because what they've recognized is only licensed practices within that paradigm. So let's say, for instance, you have an integrative healthcare clinic. So you have an MD, you might have a PT, you might have a chiropractor, you might have a psychotherapist, you might have an acupuncturist, but you're not going to have an energy healing practitioner at this point in time. So I think the future is, yes, we want to be able to offer our services because it makes a difference. And I think that that's why they're kind of looking at us saying, meaning the government and the powers that be, and saying, if you want to be part of the healthcare system, then the first kind of thing we need to do is some kind of regulation. And of course, certification is really the key at this point. This is the quality certification programs is what the government is looking for. And there are some out there. And there are a lot that don't meet those standards. So certification and then licensure is really the next step. This is just how our healthcare system is managed and how it's framed. And I think with respect to licensure, I think it's important for people to know there's a lot of people saying, well, I don't want to be licensed and I don't want to have to be regulated by anybody. I just want to go out and do what I want to do. And it's all about control. It's all about money and all those kinds of things. But I think what's important to understand is the government's not out to get you. The reason there's licensing statutes to begin with healthcare is based on the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which states that the states have the power to enact any kind of laws and regulations to protect the safety and welfare of their citizens. And that's the underlying regulatory value of why there are licensing laws. And I can get behind that. It's not a perfect world. We know licensed people can be unethical. They can harm people. That not necessarily are they all highly competent just because they're licensed. But the fact is, how do we credential energy healing and really make it part of mainstream healthcare so that people can access what energy has? And the fact is, as a more holistic approach, and as people are looking more towards this concept of science and quantum physics coming together again, and I'm seeing all kinds of things around, all the ancient indigenous cultures and how they viewed health and wellness, and how now science and quantum physics is kind of being able to replicate a lot of those principles and concepts. And that here we are as energy healing practitioners, that we can make a huge difference in the health and welfare of someone. And they may not even need allopathic medicine if we can get their energies balanced and so forth and so on. So I don't know exactly where it is. My sense is being from where I sit and the kind of work that I do, that the states are moving towards licensing energy healing practitioners, and that will give the freedom for people to practice if they're licensed. It's going to exclude some people that aren't going to be able to meet the licensure requirements. But I think that certification is number one, and where I think we're moving more, like what you guys are doing, into having more really legitimate and professional certification programs. That's critical. And then the next step is licensure of energy healing practitioners.
This brings us really to the flip side of the coin, and really, despite the fears this might generate in people or the uncertainties, a feeling of gratitude, maybe perhaps, for this idea that if this is to be taken seriously, if it is to be respected and well practiced, energy healing as an art form, as a contribution, that it should be rightly subject to regulations, legalities, to help protect both clients and practitioners alike.
Well said. Yes, absolutely, Christabel. Yeah. I think it does offer something to both the public that want to come and use energy healing practitioners, and also for us as practitioners to have the right to practice without, all the fear that's around what we're doing and how we're being, subject to these fears and the legalities and the real risk of being charged with practicing a licensed profession without a license.
I'd love to ask you, Midge, as a practitioner yourself, what your hopes might be, your aspirations for the field of energy medicine, energy work going forward.
I think what I would like to see is that, it becomes accessible to the public and that they can access these kinds of modalities and these kinds of practitioners for their health and well-being. Because I think a holistic approach to healthcare has to include energy. We are energy beings. And so without that component, then we don't have a holistic healthcare system until we are part of it. And so that's what I'm hoping in the future, that we will be able to integrate and be of service and to really show that what energy healing can do in terms of promoting overall health and wellness, and almost like a preventative way of living that can keep other kinds of physical issues at bay if we're well balanced, and so forth and so on. So yeah, my hope is that, we can offer our services to the public and that people can feel better and be better and live more healthy and happier lives.
Midge, if somebody wants to find you to see about your work, where might they do so?
It's pretty easy. My website is midgemurphy.com, MIDGEMURPHY.com. My book, Practicing Energy Healing and Integrity, The Joys of Offering Your Gifts Legally and Ethically, is available on Amazon as a print book and a Kindle book. The PDF version is available on my website, and the exam based on the book is also on my website. And so I certainly encourage any energy healing practitioner out there who is wanting to be taught or learn a little bit more about this and to really sort of dive into how to have a legally sound practice, that my book is a great resource, and the exam is also a great investment in your practice, and you get a certificate of completion, which is a professional credential that makes you more professional in terms of how you present yourself to the public.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Midge, for taking the time and joining us today, for sharing your wisdom, a lot of information and knowledge in this area. It's a fascinating subject. I know it's very stimulating discussion for Keith and I, and for our considerations for field dynamics and ourselves going forward. Very much celebrate and welcome the work that you're looking to do and achieve.
Well, I really appreciate that, because for a long time, what I had to offer was just a little too scary out there. And so I'm really sensing that there's now interest in this level of professionalism. That warms my heart. Because I'm here to be of service. And so whatever I can share and help with to move the field forward, then I'm grateful for people like you that are really committed to having a professional training program and really creating a program that is legitimate and professional, and again, is in better service to the students that you're going to train and those students who become certified, how they are helping the clients that come to them.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time today, Midge. We really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the episode. What really supports the podcast is providing a rating and review of the show on your preferred listening platform. This helps us get the message out to a wider audience. If the topics we discussed today appeal to you, do take a moment to subscribe. Lastly, we invite you to check out our website, fielddynamicshealing.com, to learn about our training programs, private session work, and to see how we're setting the standard in contemporary energy healing. Many thanks, and see you next time.